This video was made possible thanks to the support of my YouTube members and my patrons. Pledge today and you can get early video access, your name in the credits, and more. Links in the description. Right, so this video was originally me just doing a fun what-if rewrite of Doctor Who Season 2 to try and fix some of the bigger problems that I had with that season. And I thought, yeah, this would just be a fun little project. And then once I finished it, I had a bit of a breakdown, and it made me realise just what the big kryptonite for this entire era is, and one of the biggest things that went wrong. Let me explain. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS, and I want to open up front with what this video isn't. This isn't me doing a ground-up rewrite of Doctor Who Season 2, nor is it me trying to pitch my own vision for what Doctor Who is, you know? I'm not going to say with this project, let's recast the Doctor and companions, let's replace Murray Gold with, I don't know, Yuki Hayashi, although that would be pretty amazing. No, for this rewrite project, I wanted to be a bit more creative with it. I wanted to work with the actual pieces that Russell T Davies and the folks over at Bad Wolf gave us to work with. As cool and out there as it would be to say, okay, here are the 8 episodes, now you get 13, now you can have a brand new companion, you can have all these new settings, these new stories, and these new villains, I feel like that's very unfair, and at that stage it wouldn't be a rewrite, it would just be complete fanfiction, which is, you know, there's merit to that, but that's not what I wanted this project to be. So I wanted to keep the 8 episodes that we had from the Robot Revolution to the Reality War, and I decided to give myself a bunch of rules. Structurally, I can't really change the episodes because of the logistics of a TV production. Once you start putting together the scripts and the stories, they have the sets locked in, they have the actors locked in, the amount of scenes, etc. I can't change that much from Doctor Who Season 2. We've got the 15th Doctor, we've got Belinda, we've got all of these extra pieces in place, and for the most part, I can't meddle with that. And if I am going to meddle with that, I have to really justify it or maybe replace it with something else. And I also wanted to be fair with the Bad Wolf production, which means that at the end of this, Ncuti Gatwa is leaving. I'm not going to rewrite it so that Ncuti has to come back for the next story. And also, we have to stick with Belinda because there is the persistent rumour that Millie Gibson as Ruby Sunday was meant to be the companion for this season, but for whatever reason, she only lasted the 1 season as a regular companion and just has a few guest appearances here and there. So with those rules in place and with the benefit of hindsight, let's put our script editor hats on and let's fix this season. So we're going to start with the Robot Revolution, which is a solid and respectable opener. There's some fun ideas here. I like the retro-futurist aesthetic on the planet Miss Belinda Chandra. I think the idea of the star named after Belinda, which causes these robots to break into her house and kill her cat and kidnap her, I think that's conceptually a really funny idea. And while my main impulse here is to sort of tinker around the edges so we don't get that really rushed Doctor and Sasha 55 relationship where she is basically saying, I'm 1 day away from retirement, and then she's instantly killed, and there's like no pathos to it at all, it just really falls flat. The main changes that I want to make to the Robot Revolution are the start and the end, and these are changes which will reverberate through the rest of this rewrite and, in my opinion, solve countless problems down the road. Firstly, we're going to establish way up front from the very beginning, from the very first scene, that Belinda is a single mother. We're not going to hide that, we're not going to retcon it as a last minute twist which causes a really morally messed up ending for the character. We're going to establish from scene 1, paragraph 1, line 1, that Belinda is a single mother to a daughter, Poppy, and she is with the father this weekend. Poppy is away for the weekend. Not only does this add to the stakes of getting Belinda home, Belinda has something to get home to. It's not just a rejection of the Doctor as a character, she has real personal stakes that she wants, that she needs to get back to. But it means that this element of her characterization, her being a single mother, is able to inform how she interacts with other characters moving forward to make for much more interesting stories, but we'll cross those bridges when we come to it. And secondly, and I feel like I'm already breaking one of my rules here, but I promise it's justified, I would recast Al. Now, Al in the Robot Revolution is played by Johnny Green, who's a really good actor. He's great in the Big Finish Torchwood Adventures. I just wouldn't have him play Al. Instead, I would recast him as Jonah Hauer-King, aka Conrad. I would have these two played by the same actor, and one of the big changes of this season is that Al and Conrad same person. And at the end of the robot revolution, when everything goes Blinovitch limitation effect, he doesn't unceremoniously get turned into a sperm and then polished away. I mean, the Doctor and Belinda could think that that happened, but what actually happens is that he gets scattered across the Doctor's recent timeline, which is how a few episodes later in Lucky Day, he's able to become Ruby's boyfriend. But I'll elaborate further when we get to Lucky Day. And the fact that we have these two characters played by the same actor can also tie into the mystery that we have with Belinda, where the Doctor has encountered someone who looks an awful lot like her, played by the same actor, in Boom the previous season, and this single event in the robot revolution is what has caused this duplication. So Belinda gets duplicated into the future in Boom, and Al gets duplicated in the present day as Conrad. So now that we've established these pieces in place, let's move forward to Lux. Lux is another story where I think we can do a lot of tinkering around the edges and some micromanaging, particularly with the character of Reginald Pye, who gets a really affecting introduction scene and a flashback with his late wife, but then after that is so poorly characterized that he decides he'd rather kill himself than remain in the story. However, the setting of 1950s Miami and Lux himself as a villain is really captivating, and there's some really solid stuff that I want to buy into a lot more. But we could already see our rewrites from the Robot Revolution making Lux a much more interesting story, where you have Belinda talking to Renee in the diner and seeing how she's coping or not coping with the loss of her child is something that can motivate Belinda even more into action. But the big changes that I want to make in Lux are once again towards the end. I think that having the Doctor and Belinda become animated creations, it's a really cool idea, and it's one of the best moments of the episode, but it just feels like they're not pushing the idea as far as they should, and they're leaving so many cool potential ideas on the cutting room floor. It feels like they're not really trying. No, what I'd do is that I would have the scene where the Doctor and Belinda meet the fans of Doctor Who. I would shorten that significantly and then replace that time with essentially an animated montage of the Doctor and Belinda escaping Lux in the film reel. I'd want them to experiment with really cool and fun animation styles like Hanna-Barbera 2D animation, go stop motion, go black and white, go anime, 3D, and they could even tie in some fun live action implementation similar to what they did to their season 2 promotional campaign, where the Doctor and Belinda would land in different BBC shows like The Traitors and Gladiators. There's a really cool one when they land in Hey Dougie, stuff like that. I want them to experiment and really play with the idea that Lux is not just an animated creature, but a creature who's able to encompass all of celluloid, because he's the god of light. He's not the god of animation, even though he himself is an animated character. And another change that I do here, which would have reverberations throughout the rest of the season, is that when Lux is trying to steal the Doctor's regeneration energy, I would actually have this be the moment when the Doctor hallucinates, or maybe not, sees Susan, played by Carol Ann Ford. We don't save that until the Interstellar Song Contest. No, it's here in episode 2. The Doctor is on the brink of death, he's about to die and have his regeneration energy stolen, so he sees Susan. He thinks it could be a hallucination or something brought on by Lux, but later on we'll clarify what these visions are, but yeah, he sees Susan here. Next up, we're going to Well, which, for my money, is a really great story. I actually would change very little about this one, with one exception. The creature is not the Midnight Entity. It's a standalone creature, it has no callbacks to the past of the series, it's just its own thing. I think it's really cool in the moment that, oh my god, this is a reference to this really great story from the David Tennant era. You know, that's a cool, like, gut reaction moment, but in the long run it just ties this creature to that story, and Midnight's a phenomenal episode, and I think it sets the Well up to fail that it's going to be compared to what is one of Doctor Who's greatest episodes. It doesn't feel fair to the Well, because I feel like it's contributing so much on its own that is unrelated to Midnight. It also means that when the creature that came out of the Well starts throwing everybody around, it doesn't feel out of character, because it's its own thing. Yeah, some fans can make a comparison to Midnight if they want to, but the story shouldn't be emphasizing that. Just let this creature be its own thing that really freaks out the Doctor. I have a feeling that they made it the Midnight Creature in the hopes that the back catalogue of Russell T Davies Doctor Who would find its way on Disney Plus for an international viewership to watch and call back to, but the fact that that didn't happen means that you have potentially tens of millions of people with a Disney Plus subscription outside of the UK who are watching an episode that calls back to a story that they can't watch on that streaming service. It adds another barrier to new fans getting into what should be a new fresh era of the show. This isn't nearly as bad as Sutekh's return at the end of the previous season, because that was calling back to something over 40 years ago, whereas the Midnight Creature is a lot more current, even though it's still like over 15 years old. And to its credit, The Well is dealing with a lot more interesting character and atmosphere stuff that the story is able to survive without the prerequisite knowledge. And much like Renee in Lux, by opening the series by establishing that Belinda is trying to get home to her child, we've added an element to the story where Belinda has more of a connection to Alice, who's wanting to be reunited with her daughter. Just being upfront with this element of the character is already adding more dimensions to her, and I think it outweighs the benefits of making it a pretty shallow finale twist. It also means that Belinda might be more predisposed to trusting Alice, whereas everyone else in the room is trying to turn on her. And that can also reflect on the audience, who are thinking Belinda only trusts Alice because they've got this connection, but maybe Alice is trying to trick her. Next up, we have Lucky Day, written by Pete McTighe, and this is where we start setting up some ideas for the end game of Season 2, because we're setting up Conrad. And one of the big plot holes of Lucky Day is, how is Conrad able to have this front-facing Lucky Day podcast that it's a filmed podcast as well, so the public know what he looks like. He's able to have this podcast where he's able to bring Ruby Sunday on to talk about her alien encounters and encounters with the Doctor, but then it also wants to play the twist of actually he's part of Think Tank and is trying to bring down UNIT and bring out this whole conspiracy theory about aliens. It's a cool twist in the moment, but when you think about it, how does he have these two concurrent podcasts and personas at the same time? And there's no flags tripped at UNIT. But what we've done is that by having Al and Conrad be played by the same actor, that could potentially fix the plot hole of having multiple public-facing podcasts, because maybe Conrad literally has just come out of nowhere. I think Lucky Day is playing with some really interesting concepts, and I do like the idea of Ruby Sunday just outwardly addressing that she might have PTSD from her travels with the Doctor. People had an issue with this when watching the episode, but for me, I'd keep it. I like the idea of being able to name the issue that this past companion is having and her trying to face it. I wouldn't change much of the story from Ruby's perspective. It's more about Conrad and the idea that he could be an unreliable narrator. When Conrad meets the Doctor as a child, he tries to explain it to his mother, who's physically abusive to him, and then later on in the story, he says that his mother's passed away, but then UNIT do a background check and discover that no, his mother's not dead. In fact, she lives in the south of France with a nice villa paid for by Conrad. That's not to say that Conrad couldn't have had a physically abusive parent who he then lavishes all of this money and these resources to. That's not unrealistic, but it does for a moment give some question marks as to what is his relationship with his parents, and I'd like to emphasize the idea that Conrad is not a reliable narrator. And I want to bring to the forefront what Conrad and people at Think Tank, what they think about the constant alien invasions in contemporary Earth. I want to make this like almost a Love and Monsters spiritual successor, like a Love and Monsters but for the podcast age. And with that, we'll leave the rest of Lucky Day alone. I feel like we could change some things about Kate's behaviour and how she deals with Conrad, but maybe that was part of a big UNIT accountability story arc that Russell's wanting to do later, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and I won't touch the rest of the story. Next up, we have The Story and the Engine by Inuit Allums. I'm not changing a thing here. This story is brilliant. I fucking adore it. Next.
Welcome to the Interstellar Song Contest!
Okay, we're in the home straight. The Interstellar Song Contest, Wish World and the Reality War. This is when all of the big changes start happening. And I think in terms of changing a single episode, maybe the Interstellar Song Contest has the biggest fixes of this rewrite. So for the Interstellar Song Contest by Juno Dawson, I'd leave the first 20 minutes more or less unchanged. I think it's got a solid first act. The only things I'd change is that the Doctor is not in time to fix the Mavity field, and that while he does survive his encounter in space, he thinks that everyone else is dead, and that the audience are just floating above the station. I feel like if the Doctor is in that headspace, it makes his actions later on way more justified. In terms of story logistics, the Doctor learns later on that there is some sort of bubble that is being powered by the venue that's keeping everyone alive, but the power supply that powers this bubble is not infinite, so there is still a ticking clock in order to save the audience. The Doctor can still have his near-death experience and can see visions of Susan, except what we've done in Lux means that this is not the first time he's had this vision. And then the big changes start happening when the episode itself starts falling apart, and that's the Doctor's first interaction with the Kid when he's on that video call. In the episode, he doesn't even bother to ask Kid why he's doing what he's doing. The episode has to make the Doctor act insanely out of character so that he can go on his violent outburst towards the end. It's so contrived. Whereas here in this video call, the Doctor can be angry, he can be frustrated, but he still does try and ask Kid what his motives are. In the episode, he doesn't even ask. Here, Kid's evasive. The Doctor still asks, which I think is important, but the Kid doesn't answer. The Doctor discovers that Kid has a delta wave that is going to kill everybody watching. Do not specify a number, or if you're going to, do not specify 3 trillion. It's ridiculous. It kind of removes all credibility from the story. You know, what's the saying? 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic. Like, it doesn't matter what the number of viewers are, just emphasize that it's the viewers. So the Doctor confronts and incapacitates Kid. I have no issue with that in the episode. However, he learns that the Delta Wave box needs a specific code or a password to deactivate it. Kid is resilient. He's not going to tell the Doctor the password. He's not going to tell the Doctor what he needs to know to stop the Delta Wave from killing the audience. So that's the Doctor's impetus to start trying to torture it out of Kid. And in this rewrite, we've actually put in some legwork to justify the Doctor doing this to Kid. He's actually doing it because he needs the code to the Delta Wave box. The audience are still at risk. The Doctor thinks that the audience who are in space in this bubble are dead, so he's not thinking clearly. And the Doctor in the video call has already tried to reason with Kid. So if for some reason Russell T Davies puts his foot down and says, no, this episode does need to have the Doctor torture a genocide survivor, we've at least put in some legwork to justify why he's doing it, whereas the original Interstellar Song Contest doesn't even try. However, one of the big changes that we have to make is what stops the Doctor, because in the original version of the Interstellar Song Contest, even the pleading of his granddaughter Susan does not stop the Doctor. It takes Belinda walking in. I think that his granddaughter should be enough. You either have Belinda walk in and that stops him, or you have the granddaughter. You can't have him reject Susan like that. So either the Doctor doesn't have a vision of Susan and Belinda stops him, or the Doctor has a vision of Susan and that stops him. Take your pick, it's one of those. Either way, Belinda walks in with Cora, the Hellion who knows Kid from their childhood, and Cora knows the code that will stop the Delta Wave. Maybe it's a phrase from her and Kid's childhood or something. Either way, Cora is able to stop the Delta Wave, and Belinda is horrified by what the Doctor has done. As Belinda and the rest of the supporting cast start reviving the attendees of the Interstellar Song Contest, the Doctor and Cora work behind the scenes to hijack the broadcast. And while the original version of the Interstellar Song Contest has Cora sing her song and then everybody just claps and forgets about the genocide that's happened to the Hellions, in this version, while Cora's singing her song, the Doctor uses his TARDIS to go to the corporation, the Poppy Honey Corporation, and wipes them from history. Through Cora and through the song, he learns what the Hellions have been through and who did this to them, and decides to take matters into his own hands and just wipes them out Villain Guard style. He then comes back to the contest. Belinda says that she's grateful to the Doctor for all of these travels and for ultimately doing the right thing, but she's ready to go home and she's scared of him. I think that's important because The way the Interstellar Song Contest currently ends is that the Doctor does these terrible things, and then he and Belinda walk back to the TARDIS saying, this was my rise like a phoenix moment, this was my Waterloo, and there's such a phenomenal disconnect between what the Doctor has done and what the episode is saying that he's done. And the Interstellar Song Contest ends with the same cliffhanger. Maybe it was even brought on by the Doctor wiping a corporation out of history, time is going all wibbly, and then the TARDIS doors explode because this is 2008 all over again, and then the credits roll, and there's no mid-credit scene. There's no Rani reveal. What's really funny is that the week that I'm recording this, Doctor Who magazine have released an interview with Stephen Moffat reflecting on the 8th Doctor, and he talks about how in the original script for The Night of the Doctor with Paul McGann coming back, he was originally going to have the Rani in that story, but then he thought it would be a terrible idea to bring back the Rani. And for some reason, no lessons have been learned from that, and Russell T Davies decided to bring back the Rani in a really terrible mid-credit scene with a bi-generation that's really confusing and underwhelming. So, in this rewrite of Season 2, we're not bringing back the Rani. While Archie Panjabi did a good job with the material given, she's not in this season. She's one of the few elements in this series that we are just gonna outright excise. However, we're still keeping Anita Dobson as Mrs. Flood, because I think she's great, I think she's got a lot of potential. I just think that having her immediately be undercut by another version of the same character in the same story, it does Anita Dobson a great disservice. I think she is capable of being a standalone villain on her own, which is what we're going to do in the finale, Wish World and the Reality War. So because we can't alter the fundamental structure of this finale too much, we can only really tinker around the edges. What we're doing is that we're going to recontextualize Mrs. Flood as a different character. She's not the Rani, in fact, she's one of the Pantheon. I understand that this was a fan theory, this is not something that I'm making up out of my own accord. Mrs. Flood is actually Historia. She's the god of stories. With enough power, with enough energy, she has the ability to do something small, like breaking the fourth wall, or something huge, like rewriting the narrative of creation. And what she's done with the Doctor and Belinda using the Vindicator across their travels is that he's given her enough energy to grant this wish of Conrad for his own conservative wish world, which Historia has gifted to Conrad. Mrs. Flood chose Conrad because of his connection to the Doctor's recent companions with Belinda and Ruby, and also his encounter and timey-wimey ending at the end of the Robot Revolution. And what instigated this, apart from just the general emergence of the Pantheon over the past couple of seasons, is that the Doctor taking the active step of removing the corporation in the Interstellar Song Contest. That's what's prompted her out of the shadows, because she feels like she doesn't control the narrative anymore. That could even lead to some fun commentary about the Eurovision Song Contest, essentially whitewashing horrible crimes. If you catch my drift, if you know what I mean. So with this, one of the big changes that we're making thematically to Wish World is that Conrad is the main villain, as opposed to it being the Rani wanting to bring back Omega. I think having Miss Flood, I think having Historia be the instigator of this means that Conrad is able to come out of his shell more as a character, as opposed to just some random guy who they make sandwiches for. He's still jilted over Belinda's rejection of him from the Robot Revolution. Now, Wish World as an episode has a really compelling premise. It's just that the televised version doesn't pay any of these ideas off or follow them through, so I still want to retain those ideas and explore them further. I want to bring Wish World out of its shell. The idea that this nuclear family worldview, this conservative worldview that's at the heart of Wish World as a story, that it's so inherently anti-human and anti-reality that it has to break. And that breakage is the whole point. That's what resets this story. So what we have from the ending of the Interstellar Song Contest is that the Doctor and Belinda are separated, and Belinda is caught in a time loop of dates with Conrad. Historia is using these cascading contradictions of the Wish World to reset the day every day when it breaks apart, allowing Conrad and Belinda to Groundhog Day themselves a bunch of first dates over and over again. And Conrad's hope is that Belinda will eventually see the world his way and finally go out with him. And the leverage that Conrad has over Belinda is that Belinda's daughter Poppy no longer exists in this Wish World, and she won't exist unless she enters into this relationship. This approach also allows Jonah Hauer-King to be in a lot more of the finale than he was in previously, and it also means that, okay, maybe Belinda is trapped in a box, but at least she's doing stuff in the box. Maybe Poppy doesn't exist in this world because Conrad's wish world doesn't want Belinda as a single mother, or because she's also a non-white baby. Because if Russell T Davies and Peter McTighe in the Robot Revolution and in Lucky Day, they're going to deal with concepts like podcast grifters and incels, so much of their grift is them complaining about supposed white birth rates. The Robot Revolution and Lucky Day sets up these ideas, sets up these themes, but then ultimately the story pulls its punches and doesn't want to comment on the inherent racism that's key to these movements and the ideology, because it would rather replace a story that's about something with, it's the Rani, it's Omega, So that's what's happening with Conrad and Belinda, but back on the Wish World Earth, we still have this Dr. John Smith who's going into UNIT every day to work, but these scenes never really sat right with me because it felt like, once again, we were leaving so much good material on the table. If we are going with this idea of incel conservative podcasters, then why in Conrad's Wish World would Kate still be in charge of UNIT? No, we're going to mix up the hierarchy. Ibrahim is in charge of UNIT, and Kate is a subordinate. And we're also going to demote John Smith. He is a cleaner at UNIT. And you know what, just for fun, we're not going to have a random box in the background where the Vlinx is implied to be. No, we're going to have like Nicholas Briggs in person in like a bowler hat with a mustache and stuff in this world, in this weird world. He's just going to be back there tippy typing on a typewriter. I just want to see that. I want to see Nicholas Briggs in a bowler hat. We're going to keep the interaction with John Smith and Ibrahim with the beautiful man bit. I think that's a really great scene. And also, subject to availability, we're going to try and have Jonathan Groff in the story as well. We're going to try and have him as Rogue, as part of this Wish World UNIT family, except he's an employee who is closeted. We're not going to have a horrible green screen TV cameo. When it comes to other characters, let's talk about Mel, because this is one of just the biggest obvious contradictions of the finale, to the extent where I'm kind of amazed that no one caught it during the writing, during the filming, and the editing. How did this happen? When we meet Mel in front of John Smith's house in Wish World, she's like, yeah, you know, I'm single, no parents, no children, so I'll just sit in silent contemplation and be jolly glad. And then, in the reality war, she goes on a little orange motorbike and then arrives at Unit HQ, takes the helmet off, and is like, I was a housewife. Why did no one catch this? I know it's a nitpick, but it's so indicative of this era that these obvious discrepancies in a multi-million-pound production just never got caught. What is happening at Bad Wolf that things like this can happen? Instead, what we're going to do with Mel in our quest of making Wish World about something is that she's ultimately going to be a spinster. She's going to put on that brave face outside of the house when she's taking the bins out, but what's going to happen is that she's going to go into her home, she's going to be alone, and she's just going to spend day after day sitting in her armchair in her living room watching Conrad's broadcasts, kind of like your average American Fox News viewer, just sat there for hours on end consuming and just getting bitter at the world. I even envisage this as Mel sitting down at the armchair, and then we time-lapse multiple days, and that's just all Mel is doing. And the explanation for this is that Conrad has no use for old, unmarried, childless women in his Wish World, so he literally has no idea what to do with her, so just makes her a consumer of conservative propaganda. And beyond that intervention, Historia has gone a few steps further, where she's removed the whole noble family from the universe. So no 14th Doctor, no Donna, no Rose. She's, for lack of a better term, she's created a literal plot hole in Chiswick so they can't get involved. Because that's one way to deal with the constant question from fans, why isn't the 14th Doctor helping here? And then we've got this underground society of people with disabilities that Conrad doesn't know what to do with, so they're just sort of invisible to the world, which I think is a really interesting bit of commentary, and I'd like to keep that in the story. We've got Shirley Ann Bingham. Hopefully we can bring Morris back, because I loved him in the previous season. Hopefully he's got availability for the filming days. We've also got Tharies, all the important people, and they work to find and recruit Ruby, who is somehow immune due to her experiences in 73 Yards. While this underground society of people with disabilities is a really fascinating idea in Wish World, ultimately they don't do anything story-wise. They don't actually contribute anything to the plot. They're present when the cliffhanger happens and they're watching it, but then the world resets and nothing happens with them. So in this version, their mission, along with Ruby Sunday, is to kidnap John Smith from UNIT. They basically bag him and throw him into a van once his workday is done at UNIT, and they use his connection with Ruby Sunday to snap him out of being John Smith and turn him back into the Doctor. The only story elements that I don't really have a solution for in this rewrite is what's the cliffhanger ending from Wishworld to the Reality War? Because we don't have the Rani announcing their plans to the Doctor, we don't have Omega potentially arriving and breaking through the universe, we don't have that, so I don't know, let me know in the comment section below what you think the cliffhanger to this new version of Wishworld could be. We're going to carry on as normal anyway, like it's an extra long episode, but I don't really have a cliffhanger for the ending of Wishworld leading into Reality War. I do want to try and keep Anita there, because I think that her inclusion in the Time Hotel, I think that's a really good cliffhanger out. I love the idea that Mrs. Flood also took Christmas off, which is why she didn't account for that. I just think it's really good. When it comes to Anita, though, I'd want to involve her more in the action later on, or at least do more than just holding a door open, because I think it would be a good rejection of Conrad and his worldview to have a presumably unmarried pregnant woman be one of his ultimate undoings. Because what we have in Wishworld and the Reality War to try and combat this world that Conrad has created is that with the UNIT family, with the Doctor and Belinda and Ruby and this group of disabled people in this underground society, is that we have this group of people who are basically considered diversity hires and woke casting or whatever, but they're ultimately the Doctor's extended family. They're ultimately the people who are able to make the world a much more interesting and lively place, and they're ultimately what bring down Conrad, and I want to emphasize that in the story. So in this rewrite, the titular Reality War is the Doctor and UNIT having to somehow break into the Bone Palace in order to break Belinda out of this prison that Conrad has made for her. And to add to the stakes, and another weapon in Historia's arsenal, is this threshold that's inside the Bone Palace. Now, a big thing is made of this threshold in Wishworld, and so much time in the episode is spent to the Doctor and Belinda having to cross this threshold that you think it's going to tie in later on to the events of the story, but it just doesn't. It's just elongating the story. So instead, the Doctor and the people at UNIT getting onto the Bone Palace, that's the easy part. The Doctor having to cross this threshold, that's where the drama lies, and in order for the Doctor to cross that threshold to save Belinda, Belinda has to have faith in the Doctor and accept him into her story. And because the Doctor has been unable to get Belinda home because of what he did in the Interstellar Song Contest, and because of the doubt of the Doctor that Conrad is trying to put in her mind, Belinda doesn't believe in the Doctor, thus he's not allowed to cross the threshold into her story, and UNIT are fighting off the bone creatures to buy Belinda and the Doctor time. So throughout Wishworld and the Reality War, we have these scenes where Conrad and Belinda are going from date to date to date, and Conrad is attacking the Doctor's character and credibility and asking her questions like, do you really believe people like the Doctor can be that altruistic and really exist? He's clearly got an ulterior motive. He's trying to turn Belinda against him, and she's trying her best not to relent. And the metatext here is that this is Doctor Who ultimately fighting to justify its existence in a world that's rejecting science and experts and outsiders. Once again, this rewrite is making Doctor Who about something and trying to find its place in the mid-2020s. And this also makes Belinda a sort of meta-commentary on the reluctant Doctor Who fan in the 2020s, someone who doesn't just take the Doctor as a given in the world, and that the Doctor has to sort of fight to continue existing as an institution. And rather than having Kate Stewart say, "We are all your children," instead we push that into the subtext by having this group of misfit characters, these people who are part of the Doctor's life and the Doctor's world. They're coming together, they're banding together to fight off the bone creatures, culminating in Belinda ultimately rejecting Conrad's worldview and giving an impassioned defense of the Doctor, and that is going to let him into her story, whether we're honoring the heroes of the past, processing the trauma of our present, or fighting for our unknown future. We're fighting for the Doctor, thus allowing the Doctor to step over the threshold into Belinda's story and get her out of there. In the original Reality War, I like the idea of Ruby with the foundling wish baby being the one to stop Conrad in the end. I want to try and include that here, but maybe Poppy is the wish world baby. I don't know, let's figure it out later. We'll fix it in post. So with Conrad's wish world illusion broken and the Bone Temple crumbling and falling apart thanks to Unit's assault, the Doctor, Belinda and Ruby and everyone at Unit have conquered over Mrs. Flood, have conquered over Historia, whose goal was to end the Doctor's story, bring him down to Earth and replace his altruism with a no such thing as society wish world. Now let me know in the comments section if you think that's a decent idea for a story or not, but I think it's inarguable that this rewrite prevents this finale from being basically identical to the previous one. A glupshitto villain from the classic series tricks the Doctor into fueling their power with his trips across time and space in order to change the fabric of existence, and their giant CGI form is defeated by a big blue laser beam. Once you notice this, you can't unnotice it. Russell T Davies literally just wrote the same finale twice in a row. So the wish world has ended with the combined efforts of the Doctor, Belinda and Ruby, but somehow as the world is falling apart and normality is being restored, Poppy is somehow forgotten. This could be like Conrad's final screw you to Belinda, with only the Doctor, Belinda and Ruby remembering her. So they go back to Unit and no one else seems to know what's going on. Belinda is understandably crushed, and because the audience have been following this journey with Belinda trying to get back to Poppy for the past 8 weeks, it means something now. We've got that emotional time investment, and we can also get some character work with Ruby, who watches Belinda just completely break down over this. This might be the closest that Ruby will ever get to seeing how her biological mother felt when she was left at the church. And then we have to cave to the production logistics of the past season. Ncuti Gatwa wants to leave, so we have a few days of reshoots to make that happen. I love the idea in the Reality War of the 15th Doctor giving his life and regenerating in order to nudge reality to bring Poppy back. I think it's beautiful and profound for the Doctor to give his life to save a child. And while I love Jodie Whittaker's appearance in the Reality War, coming back as the 13th Doctor to help the 15th Doctor along his way and to feel better about the change, I like that idea. We're not going to have Jodie Whittaker in the Reality War. No, instead of the 13th Doctor appearing to the 15th inside of the TARDIS, it's Susan. Susan is the one who's going to help the 15th Doctor cross over the threshold. They can have their long-awaited reunion. It could even be ambiguous as to whether or not this is a Susan hologram or an apparition or something. That could even tie into the idea as to how Susan was able to break through Historia's influence over the course of this season, because she is foundational to the Doctor's story. And she explains to the Doctor, you're doing all of this to unite a family, and it's about fighting for the lost children of the world. So Susan reminds the Doctor why he's doing this, and that it's okay that he's doing this, and that it's for the greater good. The Doctor says goodbye to Belinda at her home and meets Poppy. I think it works as a twist in this version of the story for Poppy's existence to not be a twist, but the fact that Poppy is the same Poppy as Space Babies. That's the twist as far as the Doctor's concerned. Captain Poppy from Space Babies is the same as Poppy Chandra in Season 2. The Doctor could even hand-wave away a technobabble explanation as to how the splitting timeline with Belinda and Mundy and Alan Conrad, maybe that's reverberated down the family tree. I have a feeling that Space Babies in Season 1 was originally meant to tie into Poppy's role in Season 2. If we're to believe the rumours that Ruby Sunday was meant to be a 2-season companion, that could sort of make sense as to how Space Babies could have been one of the Rani's experiments, but like I said up front, we're working with the production logistics where we have Belinda as the companion this season, so we're going to have to drop that explicit Space Babies connection, if it even existed in the first place. And while for the most part I like Ncuti's regeneration, the big thing I'd change is his final line. Rather than a reference to Joy to the World, which I'll admit I am biased against because it's a callback to an episode I don't think is very good, I'd rather call back to The Story in the Engine, with the Ernest Hemingway reference. I'm born, I die, I'm born. And while I understand the motivation of Russell T Davies wanting to call in a favour with Billie Piper and say, will you be the person who Ncuti regenerates into for headline speculation and to keep the show going, I think with the benefit of hindsight that was a massive mistake. It just looks incredibly desperate. So what we're going to do is we either fade to black for the regeneration, or we stunt cast a big new name, or we have Ncuti walk into the sunset, or he somehow survives and he's able to drift away or something. Like, either way, we need to have a more open, flexible ending. We can't tie it to Billie Piper, right? you know, there's so many options you can pick. Fade to black, cast a new name, keep shooty. Those are the 3 options. And they just went, fuck it, let's go for the 4th worst possible option. The only way this could have been worse was if he regenerated into David Tennant again. And I say that completely sincerely. And there we go. That's where this project, where this rewrite video originally ended. Now, the intention of this video and any video that I make is not I'm a better writer than Russell T Davies. Hell no, I only dabble in creative writing every so often, and if I do write anything even, let's say, 30% as good as Tooth and Claw, I can die a happy chap. A good metaphor for writing a TV series is imagine being Gromit in Wallace and Gromit: The Wrong Trousers, where you're riding that runaway train with no control and you're laying the tracks in front of you hoping to reach the finish line in one piece. And the only reason I could put together a rewrite like this is because I have the benefit of hindsight, not that much hindsight. I wrote this video back in July, like shortly after the broadcast of the reality war, and I've only just now got around to recording it. And I also have a bird's eye view of the entire series, and I can pick and choose these different elements, and it's a lot harder to know what's going to work until it's actually manifested into the world, much like the casting of Billie Piper in The Regeneration. Sometimes great decisions can happen outside of the writing process which you cannot account for. Apparently Alice in The Well wasn't written to be deaf, but once they cast Rose Ayling-Ellis, they changed the script to accommodate, and then with that casting decision alone, the episode takes on a whole new, more interesting dimension, and I think that elevates the episode substantially. These happy creative accidents, they happen all the time, and no amount of rewriting can account for that. But with that in mind, and I want to emphasize that I was able to create this rewrite of season 2 because I had all of these pieces that Russell T Davies had already put in place, which also means that a story with these pieces could have actually been told. Something could have been said with all of these elements that I don't think Wishworld and the Reality War and season 2 generally, I don't think they were interested in telling a story or saying anything. A lot has gone wrong with this era, this Bad Wolf era of Doctor Who, but I want it to be known, for my money, the biggest issue here is that I don't know what Russell T Davies wants to say with Doctor Who anymore. He brought back the series in 2005, post 9/11, during the era of the TV anti-hero, where the closest thing to a moral dilemma that TV's biggest heroes were confronted with on our screens was, should I waterboard this guy a lot or just a little bit? The Ninth Doctor comes onto our screens as a maverick, an anti-establishment hero played by a working-class actor with a regional accent who was genuinely just trying to be the best Doctor that he could be, despite coming from a broken society. Not just broken, but genocided and war-torn with a colonial past. Maybe it's a metaphor for a modern war, maybe it's a metaphor for queer survivors' guilt after the AIDS epidemic, but either way, it felt like a hero who was truly damaged, but was still truly trying to do good. And that felt revolutionary in 2005. After Russell left the show in 2010, he went on to write some brilliant stories about things that he's passionate about. Whether it be a biographic TV series based on the life of Noelle Gordon, a scathing criticism of the trajectory of modern society in Years and Years, and the very literal queer survivor's guilt passion project, It's a Sin. When it was announced that Russell was coming back to Doctor Who, I was so excited because this is a man who still has a lot to say, he has a lot on his mind, and I wanted to know what 15 years of life and professional experience that he would bring back to Doctor Who. He was certainly outspoken and passionate about the state of the world in interviews and at award speeches.
And we have to realise that the things the Tories say they will do, they do. They're very good at that. We're full of doubt. They're not. They will do this. It is wrong. I know I'm kind of trying to speak into the converted, but there's money in this room. And if there's money in a room, that means there's Tory voters in here. It does. You are here, and you're certainly watching at home, so please know you are voting for murderers, bastards, abusers, and liars.
And while his era opened with some interesting decisions like a potential AI allegory in Wild Blue Yonder, along with some ruminations on Doctor Who's place in culture, TV driving the world into hysteria, and most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, framing the meeting of Ruby Sunday and the 15th Doctor in the same way Russell met his late husband at a nightclub in 1998. But then, when we get to season 1 proper, Space Babies onwards, it feels like he's run out of stuff to say. Heck, Stephen Moffat is not immune to these criticisms either. The former showrunner comes back to pen Boom, and it's a really strong story. It's a cutting critique of the military-industrial complex framed through the in-universe corporation of Villengard. But then we get to Joy to the World, and the plot of that story revolves around the Doctor ensuring that Villengard detonates their latest superweapon, which ultimately kills his new friend Joy, and maybe even her mother? And the episode frames this as something magical. Oh, and something COVID parties, whatever. With no conflict in season 1 between the Doctor and Ruby, with a bunch of disjointed episodes which on their own have great moments, the actual overarching theme of that whole season appears to just be, aren't stories great?
She was important because we think she's important. It's how everything happens. Every war, every religion, every love story. We invest things with significance.
I mean, that is a valid thing to say, I guess, but I was just kind of hoping for more from someone who, and I genuinely mean this, to be one of the world's best TV writers. Fast forward to season 2, and I genuinely cannot tell you what the mission statement of the show is. Even if I had a gun to my head, I couldn't tell you what gets Russell out of bed every morning to run to his keyboard to tell more stories in this universe, except babies. They're cute. Now, I promise I don't intend to come across as a pseudo-psychiatrist for Russell T Davies, but I think he came back to Doctor Who, seeing how depressing and harsh the world has become over the past few years, and he wanted to make a show for a younger audience to give them something to aspire to, and a positive hero, a positive role model. 45-minute episodes of fun, conflict-free escapism to distract them from a burning planet. That, in and of itself, is admirable. But if that is the case, if that is the mission statement, and this is a simpler show aimed at a younger audience, then why are you reintroducing elements from 40 to 60 years ago, and you're going back to the nostalgia well for older fans so incessantly? But furthermore, and I understand this is an ideological divide, if the world is so harsh and cruel to kids, then surely that's all the more reason to give them a TV show that reflects that world and shows them how to make it better, that meets the kids where they're at. That's the biggest problem with RTD2. Whether through a lack of skill or just pure ideology and intent, it's been unable to meet the current moment. After a worldwide pandemic and elections worldwide rejecting incumbency, we're now facing a world that is more anti-establishment than ever, but what's at the heart of RTD2? Unit Tower, a big, gleaming building at the heart of a country that in real life is breaking under the weight of austerity and underfunding. But Russell seems to already know this and has reflected it in his work, because he still depicts Belinda in The Robot Revolution and in The Story in the Engine as an overworked nurse in a run-down, underfunded hospital. So you still have this massive discrepancy and contradiction reflected in Doctor Who and the real world, and there's no commentary on it. Where mass media is making us angrier and dividing us more than ever and making us fight against our own best interests, but this era still wants us to get on board with big mass media events like Eurovision, uncritically. Depressingly, the closest thing the past 2 seasons has got to meeting the current moment was in the Interstellar Song Contest, a story about a genocide victim fighting back against the corporation that committed said genocide, written, filmed and broadcast while an actual genocide is happening in the real world, and the episode has our lead character, played by an actor whose family fled a genocide and has been campaigning against the current genocide, by the way, tortures the genocide survivor who has already been disarmed and he hasn't even asked him why he's doing what he's doing, and not even the pleading of his granddaughter can break him out of that anger. And then the show frames him as having done a wonderful job this week.
And the results, 12 points.
Turns out it was my rise like a phoenix.
I've thought long and hard about this, and this episode is probably the moral low point of the show's entire 60-plus year history. And I'd argue that even if this era was a smash rating success right now, a creative team that would greenlight the Interstellar Song Contest is a team that shouldn't be working on this franchise. It would be like if Terry Nation and David Whittaker met 1960s Britain with a Dalek story where the Thals should have been exterminated and the Doctor's just absolutely okay with it. Well, Chesterton, my boy, have you ever considered that the Daleks have a right to defend themselves? So which is it, Russell? And I'm genuinely asking, is the Doctor meant to be this more simple, virtuous hero to combat the modern age of cynicism, or is he meant to be this?
How about we try this 3 trillion times?
It's just wild to me how Season 2 also started off with this great idea in Belinda. The whole metatext of Belinda is that she's the grown-up who isn't really interested in Doctor Who and kind of rejects the idea and the character, and maybe the show could actually contend with that idea of the Doctor and the show more broadly not being passed down to the next generation, but regardless of whether or not the Doctor is accepted into the Chandra family, he will still move heaven and earth, twist reality, and give up his life to protect the children of the world, symbolised by Poppy. But instead, Belinda's role as a parent is relegated to a last-minute retcon, made worse by the fact that despite a really strong showing in the first few episodes, she's mostly absent for the second half and spends most of the finale locked in a box. Now, previous Russell T Davies companions, from Rose to Ruby, they meet the Doctor in a fractured or flawed family unit, and they end up leaving the Doctor to a more complete or conventional one. But with Belinda, it's different. It feels like a conventional family structure is forced on Belinda, and she's tricked into accepting it. None of this would have been an issue if she just started the series as a single mother without it being a twist, and I don't get why that approach wasn't taken. I think what really strikes me is, I don't want to say he's incapable, that sounds like the wrong word, but just how absolutely unwilling Russell has been with this new era of Doctor Who to meet the moment, meet audiences where they're at, you know? Now, I'm obviously not expecting Russell T Davies to fix UK austerity through a blue box sci-fi show. I'm not expecting a Disney Plus deal with Ncuti Gatwa front and centre to halt fascism or stop genocides, obviously not. There's actually a saying that I'm going to butcher it, I can't remember how it goes, but you know, how the rebellious cabarets in Germany, they didn't stop the Nazis. But look at the big media that we've had in recent memory, like James Gunn's Superman being vehemently pro-Palestinian, or South Park baiting Donald Trump's administration and protesting against their own parent company during a corrupt merger. Obviously, these are massive properties made by massive corporations, but they're still understanding about meeting the audience where they're at, and they're reaping the rewards with audience praise and generating content, or whatever Russell said, and engagement. And they say something about the moment that we're in. Doctor Who in the Bad Wolf era, as far as I'm concerned, has failed to do that. In fact, episodes like Joy to the World, they feel oddly dated when it references the COVID pandemic. Now compare that to, say, Captain America Brave New World, a movie so afraid of saying anything and hacked together in the edit due to the political climate, just petrified of saying anything that might upset anyone. And then that movie arrives and it lands like a thud. Now, maybe it's a coincidence that Captain America Brave New World and this new era of Doctor Who are being fronted by black leading men and feeling terrified to actually say anything. I think that's still a coincidence that's worth pointing out. One of the ultimate ironies is that Russell T Davies did an interview claiming that the new generation of writers can't write because they're more interested in their messaging or representing their views. But with Doctor Who, here's Russell T Davies given one of the greatest media institutions this continent has ever created, and he seemingly has nothing to say about the moment that we're in, and audiences didn't want to know. What happened to the populist who framed the show's revival in a post-9/11 world with a working-class companion and a northern doctor? Russell is not the only one caught in this, let's call it, political emptiness. I mentioned the MCU earlier, but going back to Doctor Who, Chris Chibnall's era was lambasted as being, quote, woke. But if you look at it objectively, it's one of the most politically empty eras of the show's entire history. One of the big cases in point is Revolution of the Daleks. It broadcasts the year after George Floyd was murdered by police after years of escalating police tensions and over-violent tactics, and the marketing of this story, it shows this new Dalek drone on the side of the police combating protesters, and it seems like it could be setting up a really interesting story, but then the episode itself has nothing to say about police over-militarization. It's just a newsworthy image not backed up by anything in the text or the themes or the story, with its Prime Minister figure being outdated due to Theresa May stepping down between filming and broadcast. Still, it could be much worse. Imagine doing Theresa May coded storytelling in 2024. How out of touch would you have to be to do? Oh, that's unfortunate. Russell's next TV project is a Channel 4 drama called Tiptoe. It doesn't have a release date at the time of filming this, but I'm genuinely looking forward to it. In an interview with Big Issue, Russell described it as, quote, hilarious, radical, and savage. And you know what? I genuinely hope it is. I wish him and Tiptoe all the success in the world, and I hope he's able to put his passion about the world into a project in a way that he just couldn't do with Doctor Who this time around. But I don't know, man. 2005 Rose Tyler laid out the point of that whole first series in that takeaway in The Parting of the Ways.
The Doctor showed me a better way of living your life. That you don't just give up. Make a stand. You say no.
Fast forward to the same writer 20 years later, and with the war between the land and the sea, the show ends without the acknowledgement that our heroes are swimming to certain death, and our lead authority figure takes no action against the authorities and the power structures that led to that bleak ending, despite having the means to make the world a better place and the power to do so. But instead, she directs her rage and her power to a random citizen who littered on the beach.
Pick it up!
Okay, I think I'm done here. I'll end with this. Even if Wishworld and the Reality War was a terrific end to the series, and we had news of renewals aplenty, I would still think twice about any creative regime who looked at the Interstellar Song Contest and thought, yeah, we'll broadcast that in 2025. I think, metaphorically, heads should roll over that decision, and whoever decided that shouldn't be allowed near Doctor Who again. While the 15th Doctor was torturing a genocide victim who was a stand-in for a Palestinian, Ncuti Gatwa was organising with the charity Choose Love and took part in a reading outside of Parliament, reading the names of all of the children confirmed killed in Israel's current genocide in Gaza. The reading took over 18 hours. That's my Doctor. Not...
How about we try this 3 trillion times?
Hey folks, thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. I really appreciate it, especially because this is quite a long video. I wasn't kidding, by the way, when I mentioned earlier that this has been a video that I've had written since July, but I've only just now gotten around to recording and putting it all together, so thank you for your patience on that one. My next video is about a much more fun subject about the classic series, so make sure you're subscribed if you want to be updated on when that comes out. And not only will members and patrons get that video a full week early, but also it was my patrons back in 2024 who voted for me to make this particular video, so once again, thank you so much for your patience there. It will not be such a long wait when patrons and members get to vote for the next video. And if you want to get involved in that and also get your name in the credits like these wonderful people, then be sure to support me on Patreon or as a YouTube member. It really does help to keep this channel going and to keep the lights on here, and I want to give a shout out to these wonderful members and patrons: Chiba City Blues, Daniel Davis, Dean Jones, Air Hoovian, High Lord Wolnir, John, Joseph Adams, Lard Dragon Ezra, Leela, Marianne Mogensen, Michael Serrano, Palex, Phantom Forge, Raven Woods, Ray Sprinkle, Reese Lloyd, RJL, Ross A.T. Stewart, The Brit Sniper, The Scarlet Watcher, and Toy Toy. Once again, thanks so much to my members and patrons, thanks to you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.